Welcome. You're listening to The Aligned Self, Conversations in Creating a Conscious and Abundant Life. This is Daniel Denovi. I'll be your guide and host. Let's see just where we can take this. Hello, friend, and welcome back to the conversation. In the last episode, I talked about how you live your whole life in your head. You can't get out of your head. All you have is your experience in your head. You decide. You are at the center of it. And so in this episode, I thought I would share 5 ways to shift your reality, shift your thinking, to expand your thinking to create a different reality, or at least view it or change your perception on the reality that you're currently in or present to. It has never ceased to amaze me the value of one good idea. So hopefully I'm going to share with you 5 good ideas. So one of the ways that you can shift your thinking, shift your reality, is change the context in which you operate in, because the context is decisive. Another way of talking about context is your frame of reference. The frame that we approach things by give meaning. The context by which we operate in is decisive. One of my favorite stories over the years has been that of the Japanese farmer back in feudal Japan. Now, this farmer was one of the richest farmers in the land, in the village. He had an able-bodied son, and he had a horse by which to plow the field. Well, one day the farmer's horse ran away, got out of the pasture, left the field, and all his neighbors said, "How horrible, how terrible for you, you lost your horse." And the farmer replied, "Well, maybe." 5 days later, the horse returns, and with it are 5 wild ponies. All his friends and neighbors gather around him and exclaim, "You're the most fortunate person I know. The richest man in the land. Who would have known that you're going to now have 6 horses? Don't you feel just exuberant, over the top at your good fortune?" And the farmer replied, "Well, maybe. We'll see." A few days go by and the son is breaking in the new horses, and one of them throws him and he breaks his arm. He's no longer able to work in the fields. The farmer's friends and neighbors gather around and talk about his misfortune. How devastating for you, how terrible, how you must be beside yourself with anxiety. What are you going to do? Don't you feel like you're at the end of your rope? And the farmer said, "Well, maybe. We'll see." Time goes by, and later in the month, the militia comes around, gathering up all the able-bodied young men to fight in the war. His son has a broken arm. His son is not taken. He's left behind. All his friends and family now say to the farmer, "How fortunate for you, how wonderful for you, your son is spared." And you can guess what the farmer said. "Well, maybe." Now, in this story, the only thing that changed was the context. The facts of the matter were the same, but the context changed the meaning of what was going on. I can remember the California fires, and there was a reporter interviewing families after the neighborhoods were devastated, burned to a crisp. Nothing was left standing. And they interviewed one woman, and she said, "I'm devastated. We lost everything. We lost our pictures. We lost everything, the toys. I don't know what we're going to do. I'm just devastated." The reporter went on to interview another woman. Her woman said, "We lost everything. We lost all our pictures, all our memories. We have nothing. We have lost everything." But the good news is the cat got out. Everyone in the family is alive. We all got out in time. We can rebuild the house. It's not going to be the same, but we'll rebuild. We as a family are intact. Same situation for both families. Different frame of reference, though, for each of them. Depending on the frame of reference, it creates either possibility or limitation. Changing the frame or reframing a situation shifts your reality. Now, I probably should have said earlier that all these concepts, all these ideas to shift your reality come from Neuro-linguistic Programming. So reframing is very powerful. You can take virtually any situation and reframe it and get a completely different meaning. I remember visiting a friend of mine about 20 years ago, and I asked to use the bathroom. And she said, "Well, let me go in there first. I have no idea what shape it's in. The boys have been in there." As soon as she walked in, she said, "Oh my God, There's toothpaste all over the place. And she started criticizing her 6-year-old on how inept and how incapable he was because he had toothpaste smeared all over the bathroom counter. He was supposed to ask for help. He's not supposed to do it on his own. He's just a little shit. I said, whoa, I might be crazy, but in my mind, I'm seeing a completely different scene. I'm seeing a little 6-year-old that wants to be a big person. He wants to do it on his own. He doesn't want to ask for help. I can do it, he says. So he tries to put the toothpaste on his toothbrush. He doesn't quite get it on there. It falls on the bathroom counter. Of course, he can't waste it, so he's going to try and get it back on his toothbrush, kind of smears it around a little bit. But he gets a lot of it back on his toothbrush. Then he brushes his teeth all on his own. He's a big kid. And I said it just like that, all animated. And she's looking at me and starts smiling and said, I don't know why I got so angry. Your story is definitely better than mine. I said, don't worry about it. Your parents probably did the same to you, and their parents did the same to them, and you just didn't know any better. You were reacting. I like to visualize positive things, positive scenarios, see empowered people. That's just the way my brain works. And she said, well, I certainly didn't think of it that way. I said, now you'll never not think of it that way. Isn't that interesting? That was number one. That was reframing, turning it into something good. Now, another question that you can tag on to that is when anything happens, ask yourself, how does this serve me? Something devastating happens, supposedly devastating, maybe. How does this serve me? How does this work for me? What does this now make possible? These are ways to reframe the situation in a way that empowers you than disempowers you. Number 2 is view things from the context of possibility. What's possible? How do we get it done? We don't look at the limitations. We see where we want to go, and we start figuring out what needs to happen between here and there to make it happen. This is also called solution orientation. You see, most people, when they see a situation, immediately identify the problem. They're focusing on the problem. What's wrong? When you operate from the context of possibility, you see what's possible. You start looking for solutions. What's the solution? Where do we want to end up? How do we get there? You might not even look at what's wrong. And identifying what's wrong may not even matter. If you look in the mirror and you ask the question, why am I fat? We're looking at the problem. It's, from my reflection, I'm obviously heavier than I want to be, and that's wrong. There's something bad here. And so I ask the question, why am I so fat? And of course, because I'm focusing on the idea that I'm fat, I'm going to start identifying all the reasons, all the evidence to support why I'm fat. Am I any closer to a solution? Am I any closer to health and fitness? No. I just have all this evidence on why I'm fat. And of course, now that I have all this evidence, I don't feel as good about myself. Look, I'm a fat slob because I have all these reasons now. I have a whole body of evidence. That's one reality. That's one perception. The others I could look at, I weigh a certain amount. I have an ideal in my mind, how I want to be, what I want to weigh, what I want to look like. I wonder what has to happen for me to make that a reality, for me to get closer to that ideal. I start going to the gym, I start working out, and I keep the picture of my solution. I keep the picture of my destination in my mind. That spurs me on. Each and every day I go work out. In my mind, I'm getting closer. I'm reinforcing the idea that I'm getting closer to my ideal. Each and every day is shifting things, changing things. Completely different mindset. Focusing on something different, focusing on possibility. Another way of saying this is focusing on scarcity or abundance. Scarcity or abundance is simply a mindset. The universe is naturally abundant. Ultimately, it's just a frame of reference. Two people can both have $100,000 in the bank. One feels rich and the other person feels like they're going to lose everything at any moment. They only have $100,000 left. One person is coming from the context of scarcity. The other person is coming from the context of prosperity and abundance. There's more coming. I have plenty in the bank. There's more coming. I only have $100,000 left. There's not going to be much more coming. I don't see where it's going to come from. It's all your focus. Number 3 is capacity. Capacity and capability is a mindset. How much can you do? How much is possible? How much can you earn? It's all an idea. It's all a mindset. something that you've adopted along the way and programmed. You might even have evidence to support it. So in the realm of delusion, in the realm of possibility, engaging your imagination, start asking yourself, how would I go about creating 10 times this, 3 times this, 5 times this? And you keep doubling it until you get to a point where it just seems impossible. But sometimes you can say, how can I double this? How can I triple this? And we're talking about income or results, and you start looking for solutions. You start orienting yourself to making it possible. And of course, we're engaging the imagination. We're just wondering, I'm just curious, how might I double this? How could I 10x this? If I was to do this, how would I go about it? And that's the way we get around this. You see, limits on capacity, limits on capability, these are limiting beliefs. Some boundary, some imaginary boundary that's there. And the way we get around it, and it could be, I can't do something, or I don't see how that's possible. And the question that we put there is, if I did know how to do it, if I were to do it, how might I do it? You see, in our mind, in our rational mindset, the capability and the capacity limit seems like a reality. So for us to approach it from a realistic point of view, it seems like we're going to bump up against a wall. But if we just engage the imagination and ask, if I were to do it, if I did know, how might I do it? Now we're starting to get ideas. Again, this is changing the context. These are all kind of interrelated. But this question is very powerful. I use it all the time. If I did know, how would I do it? If this was possible, how might I start going about it? That's how you turn the impossible into the possibility. All right, item number 4, principle number 4, strategy number 4. That is, there is no such thing as failure, only feedback. No such thing as failure, only feedback. Now, to really understand this or put this in perspective, let's talk about game theory. Now, there's finite games and infinite games. Now, the finite game has a beginning and end. You can think about a basketball game or a football game, has a start time, has an end time, has rules, and by the end of the clock, when time runs out, you can definitely not achieve your objective. You could fail inside the finite game. But when we look at the infinite game, which can be described as your life, there's an infinite number of finite games inside the infinite game. And so you're not stopped when you lose one game. You just begin again. You play again. That's why in baseball and basketball and football, they have a number of games. And then you can kind of take an assessment at the end of the season. Again, it's another finite measurement. At the end of the season, how did we do overall? Overall, did we have a winning season? And it doesn't matter if you lost the second game or the third game. How did you do overall? It's taking a bigger time horizon and taking a look at what were your results. But then again, in the infinite game, there's a lot of finite games. And so if you lose one game, you take the approach, there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. What didn't work? What needs to work? What do we need to shift in order to get the result that we want? That failure becomes a learning event. It becomes informative about what needs to shift, what needs to change for the next time. This is the growth mindset. Now, there's the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. Fixed mindset basically says, things are the way they are. I'm not going to get any better. I'm at the limits of my capacity. I might as well do what fits in within my wheelhouse. The growth mindset is in the context of possibility. I can go anywhere from here. I can learn anything, do anything. I can hire people if I don't know. There's a multitude of different ways for me to arrive at my destination. The growth mindset, essentially that's coming from the context that anything and everything is figure-outable. You can figure out anything. You can look it up, especially today more so than any other time in history. You can figure just about anything out. And if you don't win today, you can win again tomorrow. Now, it's at this point of the podcast episode that I realized that I lied at the front end. I said there were only 5. There are only 5 ways. No, there weren't only 5. I said that I was going to talk about 5, but now I'm going to talk about 6. I realized in making the last point, there's one that's really important that I need to talk about, and that is creating options, becoming an options thinker. A lot of people think of the available options, that's all that's possible. Now, there is the paradox of choice, meaning that if you have too many choices, you become frozen. It's hard to make a choice, make a decision because of all the different options. But most people aren't very flexible in their thinking. In their mind, they only have a few considerations about what's possible for them. But when you start entertaining different approaches, different alternatives, how many different options, how many different ways can you create something here or go about something, that creates more flexibility. This is grounded in the NLP presupposition, requisite variety. Requisite variety essentially comes from biology. When they look at different species, the species with the most flexibility and the ability to adapt to changing situations, changing environments will dominate an environment, dominate a system, or prevail. An organism with very little ability to be flexible in their approach or to adapt to changing situations will more than likely die. They will go extinct. And so from the context of human behavior, human reality, human mindsets, the more flexibility, the more options we can create for ourselves, the greater our flexibility to adapt to changing situations, the more likely we are going to prevail in different circumstances, in different contexts. When they were creating the discipline of NLP, one of the people they studied was Milton Erickson, a hypnotherapist. One of the mindsets that made Milton so effective as a therapist is that he saw his clients differently. A lot of psychiatrists, a lot of therapists would talk about resistant clients. They just didn't want to change. Of course, from Milton's experience, it wasn't the client that was resistant. It was actually the therapist that was resistant to changing their approach. A lot of people have one way of doing things, and you've seen this in the world. You've seen this in your experience with parents and teachers and different bosses. They have one way of doing things, and when things change, then things start to fall apart. Your employee's resistant, your child's resistant, clients are resistant. But from Milton Erickson's point of view, it was the therapist or the coach who was responsible for changing their approach to adapt to their client's model of the world. And I've taken that to heart. No matter how stuck you are, how grounded in your disempowerment you are, I have more ways to get you out of it, to shift it. I have more tools in my toolbox to get you unstuck than you have to keep you stuck. The other principle I'm utilizing here is there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. So if I try one approach with a client and it doesn't work out, doesn't pan out, doesn't get the result that I think it should or could, I use that as feedback and I change my approach. I do something else. And like I said, I have a lot of different tools in my toolbox. And I shift people all the time. People that have been in therapy for 8 years, I can shift them in a very short period because I look at what doesn't work and then do something else. Because I'm not entrenched, I'm not married to having to do things a certain way. I'm oriented towards results, not my approach. Another personal example that I have, when I drove to a location for work, there would be one way to go, the quickest way. I would actually create 5 alternative paths depending on how I felt that day, what was going on, that I could take and arrive at the same destination. Some were more scenic, some were more expedient, some were more effective, but I gave myself options. So when there would be a detour, I could immediately get around it and not be put out, not be upset about it. It also appeased my mind that I like variety and difference. And so when I shake things up a little bit and I take a different path, a different approach, a different mindset when I go to work, sometimes I leave 15 minutes early, and that was one thing when I was living in Columbus, Ohio. I lived on the east side of Columbus and I worked on the west side. And inevitably, when I was going to work, I'd get caught up in a lot of traffic on I-70. And so one option would be to sit there in the traffic and just deal with it each and every day. But I started playing with my leave time, creating different options. And I found if I left 20 minutes earlier, I would arrive 40 minutes earlier because there would be virtually no traffic. Evidently, whatever factory, whatever plant was letting out hadn't let their people go yet, and they weren't clogging up the arteries. And so I was able to drive just about straight through in half the time in a greater amount of peace and relaxation. And you might say, but you were there 40 minutes early. What did you do? I read a book. Sometimes I listened to music. Sometimes I ate lunch. But whatever I did, I enjoyed it. And I wasn't spending that time sitting in my car in traffic. The last principle I'm going to talk about today about shifting your reality is changing your story. All of us seem to have a story, why things are the way they are. How did we arrive here? What happened? What's the reason? You see, anytime when something happens, always people ask, why did this happen? And when you ask the why question, what do you get? A because. You get because of this and because of that. You get a story. Now, what you've learned earlier about reframing is that the story you tell isn't exactly the truth. It's just a perspective. And I'm going to tell a story from Leslie Cameron Bandler, one of the originators, one of the founders of NLP. She was seeing a woman whose family had recommended her to her as a client. Family basically said, if she doesn't change, we're leaving. What was the problem? The woman was a neat freak. She was always cleaning. She was always dusting. She was always vacuuming. And she would get upset. She'd get angry at the kids. As soon as she vacuumed the carpet, they would walk across it and leave footprints. She could not have footprints. Her kids and her husband were being driven crazy by her incessant cleaning. And in her mind, she was doing it for them so they would have a clean environment. So her intention was good, and her kids, from her point of view, did not appreciate it. They were not taking care of the environment the way she was. So Leslie's talking with this woman and says this, I want you to picture your living room carpet, freshly vacuumed, not a footprint in it. In fact, you can stand there and look at this pristine carpet as long as you want. And she saw the woman smiling. Your carpet, your house is immaculate. Now I want you to realize something. The reason it's immaculate is because your family is not there. They've gone. And she could see the smile disappear from the woman's face. And the woman said, I'm sad. And Leslie said, that's the reality of a pristine carpet. Nobody walks on it. Now, in your mind's eye, start placing footprints in the carpet enough to where you feel as if your family's present in there. And the woman started imagining footprints appearing in the carpet. And she started smiling again. Each and every one of those footprints represents love. Your children are present, your husband's present, and the fact that they're there says that you are surrounded by love. Through the power of the reframe, we began telling a different story. Earlier, I presented a different story about that 6-year-old and his toothpaste, which changed everything. I often say that you can tell the story of your trauma, or you can tell the story of your healing and your victory. You can't have access to both stories at the same time. You need to choose. When I relayed the dynamic around the little 6-year-old, I didn't change the facts. I just changed how I told the story, how it was viewed. The 2 women that were interviewed about the fire and the devastation and what was resulting was just a different way of telling the story. You see, most of the evidence, most of the stories that we tell about ourselves, about our life, are not grounded in fact. It's opinion. And we can tell a completely different story. Now, some people say, well, that's not the way it happened. Well, it doesn't matter the way it happened. How do you choose to remember it? What's the story that you're going to tell about it? You see, I deal with a lot of clients that have had difficult childhoods, difficult pasts. Now, one person can have a traumatic experience, and by every definition possible, that was trauma. That was a traumatic event. But it doesn't occur as trauma in the body unless the person tells the story that it affected them, that it had meaning for them. One of the questions I ask people all the time is, what did you make that mean about you? X and X happened, this happened, and that happened. And what did you make that mean about you? That's a story. And so when we recognize that most of our past, most of our interpretations are merely a story that we've adopted, we can tell a different story. And once we start telling a different story, a different narrative about our life, who we are in relationship to reality, then you start shifting your experience of life, your experience of reality. In fact, you can change everything with the right story. But for most people, that old story is rather persistent because they remember it. They remember telling it. They've practiced it. They've told it again and again. And the new story might be rather weak. So sometimes when you create a new story for your life, a new story of possibility for how you're going to be in the world, a new identity, that old story might pop up. And when it does, you don't say, there it is, there's the facts, there's what's real. No, you say, oh, that's that old story. My new story is filled with possibility. It's talking about where I want to go, what I want to achieve, what's going to happen. I don't care about the past. That's old news. My new story is this. And you keep telling the new story, the new identity, the new way of being in the world. Keep telling it again and again and again and letting go of the old story. It's going to be inevitable that your new story will take root, and it will be the self-fulfilling prophecy. It will be inevitable. Well, I've just given you 6 different tools, 6 different mindset shifts that you can apply to your life to shift your reality. And if you want a more comprehensive set of tools in your toolbox, I suggest you check out the NEXUS, my membership program, the NEXUS of Transformation. Now, it's an online community where you'll see me, interact with me on a regular basis. There's also several courses. One of the courses is an NLP certification, NLP Practitioner, Neuro-linguistic Programming. All the techniques that I talked about today, plus many, many more. It's essentially software for your brain. To learn more, you can check out the link in the show notes or go to yesdaniel.com. And right now, before July 4th, 2024, there's a special opportunity to get involved at a reduced rate. Now, if you're not listening to this in real time and it's after July 4th, 2024, it's still divine timing. There's always going to be a tremendous amount of value inside the NEXUS, inside the membership. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that all the other courses, the intuition course, the Badass Manifestor course, the Subconscious Mind Mastery course, all these are based in NLP, applications of Neuro-linguistic Programming. One of the problems that I had many, many years ago when I was first certified in NLP, over 30 years ago, the application part was the hardest part to figure out. I had all these tools, but how do I apply them? And so I created a practice, created a coaching practice. And over the last 30 years, I've worked with nearly 10,000 people. And so not only do you get the tools, but you'll get the opportunities to apply them to different areas of your life. All that is in the NEXUS of Transformation. To learn more, the link is in the show notes, or you can go to yesdaniel.com. Until next time, this is your friend and host, Daniel Danovi, urging you to follow your bliss. Live your life from inner signals. Be inner directed as you engage in the epic adventure.